Hello, everyone, and welcome to our open hour office hours on grading basis changes. Today, we'll be focusing on academic advisement, financial aid, and student financials. We have Vicky Stayer and Samir joining us to help out with the discussion, and then Kathy is back helping with moderating. For some quick logistics, please feel free to raise your hand if you have a question, and Kathy will unmute your mic. You're more than welcome to also type your question into the chat. Today's session is completely open Q&A, and Kathy is going to start it off by one of the questions we received during registration, and then feel free to raise your hand or type your questions. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Chris. Let's start out with a question on academic advisement, and it's from Dustin at Rose State. And Dustin, we see you're on, so we're going to ask you to interact. My topic deals with setup in academic advisement to correctly recognize pass, no pass grades that are GPA neutral. And Dustin, I am going to try to unmute you. Can you try to unmute yourself? There we go.
Okay. So I've been in the process of building our academic advisement right before all the COVID stuff started. That's all I was doing. And I have set what I'm really wondering about, I guess, is on our grading basis table, the pass, no pass have both been set as, no GPA. They don't really satisfy anything. So I'm wondering how that carries over into the academic advisement, and if there was a certain action we might need to take if they wanted to allow the pass grades to count for a requirement. As far as I think on the original webinar you mentioned GPA, and I don't currently have that set to any GPA points because it's a GPA neutral grade.
Okay, I think that's okay. So now you're at Rose State College, right?
Yes, ma'am.
In Midwest City, Oklahoma, outside of Oklahoma City?
Yes.
Is Izzy still there?
Who is it?
Izzy. Isabel? I worked here
Izzy.
years and years ago.
Yes, Izzy is, she's
Izzy, Vicky said hi.
Okay, I will.
Spent a lot of time running from tornadoes there, which was unfortunate. But so yeah, it sounds like you're on the right track. So with those like pass, no pass grades on your setup, I'm guessing that they're not including GPA because they're GPA neutral, because the weighting wouldn't be right for you to include in GPA. So you haven't the including GPA checkbox turned off on your grade scheme table.
Correct.
But as long as you select earn credit, those will still fall into the degree audit if you choose to have them satisfy different requirements. So you can use the grade category to kick them out if for some reason you had a requirement that you did not want those to apply against. So earn credit is kind of the key for the degree audit.
Okay.
So any grade that earns credit will automatically fall in, but there are other ways for you to keep those out if you want to.
Let's see, we do, so since we mirrored our satisfactory, we normally use satisfactory, unsatisfactory for some like activity classes and such. And so we mirrored those and just added the pass, no pass. And so pass is marked as an earned credit and valid attempt, but no grade point assigned to it.
The earned credit is the more important because valid attempt and grade category are really only just for academic advisement. But with the valid attempt, you have to build something in your line like one of those GLST options to pull in valid attempts, but Earn Credit will pull it in for you.
Okay. And then we just have to, I guess, handle a GPA if there is a class that, as mentioned before, was like required a C or a B. To satisfy it, we would actually have to give grade points on the grading scheme table for this grade.
Exactly. So you'll have some grades that have grade points, but the grade is not included in the GPA, which is perfectly fine.
Okay, and I think that's how our satisfactory grade was. I just wasn't sure why there were grade points on that grade.
It has to have grade points because that's how it meets your minimum thresholds that you set in your requirements, and you can have it on your course list as well.
Okay. Yeah, I think that handles what I'm concerned with. So.
Yeah. That should
Thank
get
you
it.
very much.
You're welcome.
Okay, there were a couple other questions wrapped around academic advising, so I'm going to call on a couple people. Stacia Madsen, did you have any other questions wrapped around academic advising? Did you list the impacts to AA? I unmuted you, so you should have the floor.
I think we had some similar questions about how using the putting in S grades would override some of our AA setup where we're requiring A through F on some of this. So if we were to change anything in our processes or a grade scheme table, we were afraid that it would override individual academic requirements. But I think some of the previous answer actually helped with that. I would also invite my colleague Claire Dingley, who should also be online, to see if she has any follow-up impacts.
Claire, I've unmuted your mic.
Yes, thank you very much. I can't add anything to what Stacia said. We're just really interested to hear what other people are doing in case one of our deans or our vice provost asks us to do something and we need to be ready to figure it out. Thank you.
Is that with the grading for this spring?
Yes, yes, the unique situation where students are being allowed to have grades.
Yeah, now we had talked about a couple of options, and Samir can definitely jump in here. But I know of two different things schools are doing. It's either across the board, where I guess all of the courses that would usually get A through F are going to be like a pass, no pass, satisfactory, not satisfactory. Or I know some schools are allowing the student to arrange with the instructor for individual classes if they want to have them graded like pass, no pass. So those are pretty much, I guess, the things I've been hearing.
Thank you.
Okay. Linda, I unmuted your mic from University of Arkansas Medical Sciences. You had some questions wrapped around advising as well. Did this answer your questions, or do you want to have a little bit deeper dive in any area?
Can you hear me? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay. Yes, actually, I was just wanting to type in that question, but I'm glad you unmuted me. My question is that we fall into the second category, which is letting the student choose between credit, no credit, or keeping the letter grade. So in that respect, what are we looking for in terms of validating the degree audits that we have already set up? Is it something that we should be looking for?
So I guess you're dealing with a situation where typically the courses falling into your audit would be graded A through F. But
Right.
now those same courses are going to be credit, no credit instead of the A through F grade.
Yes.
Yeah.
For
So
both.
yeah, so I would just be mindful if you have any situations where you've built rules using the grade category, for example, where you say, we won't allow like a credit, no credit course to satisfy this requirement. Because
Okay.
before all this all happened, I know a lot of schools say, no, you can't take it pass, no pass. You have to take it for a letter grade. You have to earn a letter grade in it. So
Okay.
now you'll have to be sure that those same requirements would accept this credit, no credit grade. And I think that's why I was saying on the prior webinar that you may have cases where you need to give this, I'll call it the spring 2020 credit, no credit grade, a different grade category. So it won't act the same way as your other credit, no credit grade basis that you didn't, where you were saying, no, we don't want to use those grades. Because at some point, I guess you're going to go back to, you know, the way it was before, where you won't allow a credit, no credit. You're just allowing it to be special for this particular, you know, semester.
Right.
Yeah. So I would differentiate between, you know, the prior credit, no credit, and now the special credit, no credit that we're allowing to satisfy requirements.
So what we were wanting to do was to actually use that elective grading basis. I know it wasn't like it pertains more on the enrollment side, but what we discovered while testing was that the way we wanted to do it is that we don't want the faculty to be able to do it, but wanted the students to approach the registrar's office for the grade change. So we tested using the elective grading basis, and it works. So that is definitely a new grading basis that we're creating, but it's merging between the graded and the credit, no credit.
Okay.
Would that be sufficient, or do we need to really just go out there and just create a new elaborate grading basis with the A, B, C, D, E, and then credit, no credit, or something like that?
No, that sounds like it'll be fine. So the student contacts the instructor and the instructor says, okay, and then the registrar's office actually updates the grade basis.
Correct.
Yeah, that would work fine.
This
Okay.
is Erica, who is the financial aid consultant. And I know we have some financial aid questions coming up, but I just want to preview them and say that when you're making these decisions about whether to use an existing grade basis or do a new one thing you might want to talk to your director of financial aid about is, you know, the Department of Education is going to issue more guidance about how things like students electively taking a pass-fail or you know, not passing a grade are going to be treated for satisfactory academic progress. And based on what they've said so far, I suspect that it might be nice for schools or beneficial or make things easier if there were a distinction between like a regular pass-fail that maybe the student had signed up for at the beginning of the term and a pass-fail that was specifically in response to the current situation. I think the department will give a lot of leeway to schools, but I know that that in a lot of the guidance they've issued so far, they've specifically said that there is going to be regulatory relief for students impacted. So identifying those students is going to be really important.
Okay, thank you, Sarah. Couple more areas related to academic advisement. I just want to make sure people are getting their questions answered. Let's see, Emma. Emma, did you have any more questions related to academic advising reports? I unmuted you, so you should be able to speak. Emma Alter from Central Washington. Okay. How about Lydia? Lydia Anderson from Central Washington. I'm trying to unmute you. There you go.
Hi. So Emma, I'm not sure why she wasn't able to answer. So we set ours up, and I missed a couple of minutes at the beginning. I had another call. So we set up our current grading scheme with a new basis. and added a new category. And so we really are just trying to verify that our setup is right. We're all relatively new in the sense that we've never had to do this. Everything was already set up when we all started. And so just making sure that all the appropriate scenarios are covered. And so when I was on the meeting call last week, they're talking about ensuring that you have a grade category that's different to fulfill academic requirements, but also enrollment requirements. And then how these areas may affect repeat checking or transfer credit rules. And as mentioned by financial aid, academic standing in regard to SAP and things like that. And we're on a quarter system, so our classes just started, and we have it built in our lower development environments, and we're wanting to move it up, but we want to make sure before we do that we're on the right path, because we're not going to allow students to make the choice within self-service, but rather know that the options available and work directly with the registrar's office to make those requested changes.
Okay, I can answer. I mean, that sounds like it would work fine. I would definitely just prototype everything that you mentioned, just to be sure you don't run into any snags, but just off the cuff, it sounds like that would work.
Okay, and so
I would just want to add that when you look at the grade scheme, when you created this new grades scheme, and you mentioned you created a new grade scheme or a grading basis and attached a new category to it.
A grading basis and attached a new category to the existing grading scheme.
Okay, so and then that new category, you're going to be using it in the academic requirements to subtract some of the courses, or associate your pass no pass, or
yes,
incorporate your pass over there.
Yeah, we built it very similar to what we have our credit no credit already built in that grading scheme, but we've created a complete new grade of emergency pass fail.
Got it. So I think a couple of things that you mentioned about the enrollment requirements. Yes, so it might be just makes sense to have a query created to see what enrollment requirements actually are using, or we're using that, the original grading basis, and then what courses are going to get affected with respect to the prerequisite checking. That's something which you want to take a look at. At the same time, repeat checking. When you create the pass no pass, especially the credit side of it, you want to check that there is a setup below there which says repeat checking option, that the process flag is yes, so that it actually does count for repeat checking. Count no and process yes. That kind of setup is correct as far as your credit.
Right, and that's going to be the converted grade. If it's an emergency pass, then it needs to count as a valid attempt for the AR report, and then a repeat checking equal to yes.
Correct. Yes. So those are some of the things I would look for a grading basis, making sure that the setup is correct. And like Vicky said, test for if your credit and non-credit both get that EXCL or INCL codes as far as the repeat checking goes, and also the correct academic requirements or enrollment requirements are getting being processed.
And so that would be like for PERC, if we're using the post-enrollment checking process.
Okay. Yes.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Dustin, I see that you raised your hand, and I'm trying to unmute you. Okay, there you go. Dustin, you have the floor. Did you want to add something?
First, Vicky, Izzy says hi. The process that was just talked about, I'm wondering if that is a better option than what we would do. We did not create a new grade basis. we just added 2 rows of grade input to the graded grade basis and added the pass, no pass. The other thing that we planned on doing was putting transcript text on students for the semester, but I'm just wondering, listening to that explanation, if that might be a better, it doesn't sound like it's maybe as easy of a route, but a better route or a better practice.
You know, Vicky, you can add to it, but I would say, I mean, there is what you just mentioned as far as creating a new, you added a new grades, like credit, no credit. It's a simpler way. As far as creating grade categories is, yes, does take a lot of more time, but it also depends on how your academic requirements are set up, how complex they are, how complex is your repeat checking. So it all will depend on that. What you had originally mentioned will work too, because of the fact that you're allowing these, students or administrators to choose the credit, no credit grade, which automatically will, have the appropriate grade points or calculations created or processed inside your academic requirements anyway. So I think that will work as well. But it all will depend on how complex your academic requirements are, and then whether an existing grade category is used to calculate some of your NC or CR grades, and then whether creating a new grading basis would make more sense than having a new grade category to subtract some of those courses from calculations inside your academic requirements to make sense or not. Do you want to add? Sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think it's just a personal preference. The way you're doing it is fine. I don't see any issues with that. But isn't it at the grade basis level where you can hide, or is it the individual grades? Like, I'm thinking about hiding grades from instructors that you don't want them to be able to assign, and maybe some people, you kind of want to keep things hidden and only give them certain choices. Some people say, well, choose this grade and it's going to translate to a different grade. So I think you all come to the same end result. It's just the way that you get there is different.
Yeah, we they went through, I was out, and they had meetings, and they decided, on a process for what was going to happen. And basically the student will, as someone else mentioned, the grades will post. They'll have, I think, 2 or 3 days to look at their grades and decide, do they want pass or no pass? And then they'll submit that to the professor. The professor will submit grade changes. We're manually going to update each student at that point. So the professors that are doing these, at the time they're doing them, they won't have access because we've turned off self-service for the pass, no pass grade. So it will all be our office, the registrar's office, doing the change. I just kind of started thinking about the mention about financial aid and tracking these people, and I didn't know if it improved the process of tracking and finding them by doing what the previous school was mentioning, or if it's like either way is not going to be.
I think.
Do you have the grade audit? Sorry. Do you have the grade audit turned on so that you could track the grade changes with respect to students, even if done administratively? Sorry,
yes, grade change audit is on.
Okay. Go ahead, sir.
I was just going to say that I really think that, satisfactory academic progress is ultimately a policy question. So I don't know, I guess from my perspective as like a financial aid administrator, I think I would want to be able to identify students impacted by this situation specifically versus other students who might be in a pass-fail situation for other reasons. Again, I think that's a distinction that's a little bit hard to make right now. But I think the most important thing is just to be in communication with your financial aid director or whoever at your institution is responsible for financial aid, so that what you're doing is in line with their policy interpretation. Because ultimately, each school is going to decide how they're going to implement the guidance that the Department of Education offers about SAP.
Okay, and they were involved in those discussions. The only thing that he's brought up since then is was not really related to this, but for this particular webinar, but he's brought up the cancellation and withdrawal reasons, which I've found are translate values, and adding a whole set of new values for that.
Yeah, and I think that is probably being motivated by a similar concern. Return of Title IV, which is the calculation that needs to be performed when a student withdraws, is another area where, unfortunately, the Department of Education has still promised forthcoming guidance. So again, I think financial aid offices are in a situation where they're anticipating that the department is going to offer regulatory relief for students impacted, but they don't know what it is yet. And they also know that it's going to be important to identify students, like, for example, who withdraw today because of a COVID issue versus somebody who withdrew January 15th for a totally unrelated issue.
Yes, okay. Thank you.
Okay, the next question I'd like to go to is Joan. Angel, I'm going to unmute your mic because you have a couple interesting statements that you submitted. If I can unmute your mic. Okay, there we go. First part is, what records hold the grading basis on creation and will not update if changed at the configuration level on a class?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Go ahead. Yeah, it's just we have both options, I guess, that have been discussed. There will be some classes that will be changed, will have their grading basis changed because of the nature of the discipline and the remote learning. The academic staff will determine that those particular courses will no longer be able to have a grade assigned to them. And then there's also the option, once results are released, for students to also change their grading basis to be a pass, no pass. So I wasn't able to make the call last week. I think it was on at 2 a.m. So I'm sorry, that was just a little too early for me. So I just put in a fairly general question around the changes that we need to make.
So if I understand the question correct, if the core configuration changes have been made, let's say at the grading basis table level or at the class component level, your question is, what are the other tables that are not getting affected due to the core change? And this first part of your question. So I think the answer to that is, if your enrollments, the student has already enrolled onto a class for which you're making it, a change to the configuration table. So let's say you want to make a change to a class component table to change the grading basis of that class association table or association to say, pass no pass from grading. So it's going to give you a message saying the students are already enrolled. It's going to only affect the classes for the students who are going to enroll into this class from this point on, but existing enrollments are not going to get affected. So for that to happen, you're going to have to make a grading basis change on the student enrollment side. So do a mass enroll of the grading basis change on the student enroll side using either quick enroll or a enrollment request for doing a mass selection. The other thing that it's not going to change is the grade rosters. If the grade rosters have already been generated, then you're not going to see that one class configuration change of the grading basis. You're going to have to regenerate the grade rosters in order to have that change of the grading basis effect or show the effect. It's possible that the grades have already been posted, like maybe if there is midterm grades that you guys are using, or the grades are partially posted. So for those cases, the grade rosters are going to be affected for only the grade rosters for which the students are not being graded. For any students who have been already graded, a grade change has to be issued, either through quick enroll or through enrollment request.
Thank you.
Joe, while we have you on the mic, you had another statement that you put in your notes: changes to the academic calendar while the term is in progress. Is that something you wanted to bring up?
Oh yes, that's one of the other changes we've had to make. So for the standard semester, we've extended the census date, and so there was a bit of work done to change that. It was ahead of time, so that was fine. But for non-standard sessions, we've sort of looked at other options rather than changing the census date, because we've got a large number of dynamically dated sessions in our non-standard quarterly changes. So I guess just in terms of making changes to values in the academic calendar on the fly while you're in the term is quite challenging. So I just threw that in to see if there's any gotchas I should be aware of.
For dynamically dated classes, as far as if you're extending some of these start dates for the sessions, that shouldn't really affect these downstream processes. And I think I saw your question, but yeah, those I think should be fine. As far as academic calendar dates are concerned, some of these dates are going to be driven or going to drive your self-service. Some of these dates are going to drive your drop deadlines. So yes, midstream changes like this are going to have an impact on not just those drop dates and the penalty grades and associated impact with the student accounts or refund calendars and so on. So that is a change that will need to be coordinated with your student accounts departments and such. But I don't see a huge impact on the dynamic dated classes where the sessions or the dates are changed or extended or to start later.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I want to go to another kind of a related topic. Kelly from CSUN, I'm going to unmute your mic. You had a statement that you are extending withdrawal deadlines. Are you seeing that you're extending other deadlines, withdrawal deadlines? Could you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So on our campus, what we did was we added an extra grading basis. So students are now able to select a grading basis that is A through C. And if it's below a C, they're getting no credit. And so in addition to that, our campus is interested in extending withdrawal deadlines. So we're going to possibly allow our students even further into the semester to withdraw. So I took a bunch of notes from some other folks who had mentioned they're creating new reason codes to possibly track these students a little bit better. We are also, we give our students a year to work on any incompletes. And then we charge them with an F if they do not complete their whatever work was outstanding. And so we're thinking about giving students another semester to finish any of their incompletes. We also have some repeat unit limits and repeats. We're also interested in possibly allowing a larger unit repeat for students so they can repeat more courses.
Okay, great. And there's another topic I'd like to dive into with Carolyn from Dominguez Hills. You're unmuted. You're talking about waiving upper division writing requirements for students graduating spring, summer who haven't met by exam or by course. Can you go into that a little bit more? Because I think that might be of interest to the group. Carolyn, are you still out there? It might be that some people are no longer out there.
Yeah, I was curious about that one because I was going to suggest using a student exception, a waiver, but I didn't know if there were any issues as to why they wouldn't be able to use the waiver. So I was interested in hearing that one.
Okay, I can't. Carolyn, I see you're back, but I can't unmute you. Would you like to add something to that, Carolyn? Huh, I can't unmute her. Anyway, yeah, that was basically the topic of, and I know that we've heard other people talking about waiving different prerequisites and how that would work. Vicki, in general, are you hearing that out there, that's kind of what's going on, or?
Yeah, I thought that it was more of a degree audit requirement, and I was just going to suggest that they do a student exception waiver, thinking that maybe they had some reason why that wouldn't work for them. So I was kind of eager to hear what the question was.
Okay, well, I don't think Carolyn wants to, I'm not able to unmute her, so we won't go any further there. There are just some others. Sarah, did you have anything else on, oh, she's now, Carolyn, sorry, she's supposed to go to the questions panel. Vicki, can you see the questions panel? This might be the question. There we go.
Let me see.
She can't unmute herself. Okay.
Oh, no.
Darn, I can't unmute her either. Huh.
Let me see. I don't see it. Where is it?
Okay, well, while we're trying to get her unmuted, I'm going to unmute Dustin. He has another question. Why is this not working? Dustin, can you unmute yourself? Was that? Oops, there we go. I got him. Wait, try one more time, Dustin.
Okay.
Okay, there you go.
Okay, so I wondered on that additional topic that I kind of brought up, the drop withdraw reasons for a complete withdrawal, adding translate values. Is there something that we should be looking out for on the adjustment tables if we do that? Or can those be added to existing adjustment tables, just adding reasons? I haven't seen those, so I don't know how those work.
So Samir, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, so the adjustment reasons table, I mean, I can take it from a student financials perspective, and maybe you can take it from the financial aid point of view. So yeah, those are the translate table values that typically once you add these reasons, you want to coordinate to make sure that those tables, those reasons, are actually reflected in the refund calendars associated with student financials. So let's say you added a withdrawal reason, those need to be accounted for that term's refund calendar, so that they're either appropriately they're added into the refund calendars, so that when the tuition calc runs, essentially it uses the refund calendar's specific withdrawal reasons, which is set up to either refund full or refund partially, depending upon the institution policy. So one of the first things that you want to check is when you add a reason, you want to make sure that those are accounted for in your adjustment calendars inside the setup of student financial. There's impact associated with financial aid, which there is already talked about, but there's, of course, you can talk, you can speak more.
Yeah, I don't think the impacts for financial aid are as direct in the sense that financial aid functionality is not impacted by the adjustment reasons. But one thing I definitely think, again, the key here is to stay in coordination with your financial aid director, because it seems to me, again, we don't have a lot of guidance about what the department is going to say for return of Title IV calculations, but my guess is that they're going to say return of Title IV calculations don't need to, or at least there. So to give a little context, financial aid context, I guess, for folks who maybe aren't financial aid people, typically students until the 60% point of term when an R2T4 calculation is performed, a student will not have earned 100% of their financial aid and may need to return some. My suspicion is that they're going to waive that requirement, or say that students will have earned all of their aid. If that does happen and you do adjust tuition and allow the student to withdraw, I just think you should keep in mind that that may create a situation where the student gets refunded that they may not normally get a refund, and just make sure that you're in coordination with your financial aid office on that.
Yeah, and one more item that I would want to add is if you have a specific withdrawal reason that you're creating for this particular case, and they're being used by student records or at the time of registration, you would want to make sure to test the tuition calc as it reflects to refund calendars, because sometimes if the student's tuition calc has already happened and the withdrawal reasons are added, refund calendars is adjusted in the midstream of a term, you want to make sure that the tuition calc required flags are turned on appropriately for those students in order for the withdrawal reason calculations to take effect. So yes, so there is some testing that you would probably need to do is when you add the withdrawal reasons, to make sure that the calculations are correct in order to get 100% refund to the student.
Okay, are those adjustment tables set up to where so if we were to add, other than just adding like pandemic or COVID, there are a few others that we don't have it. He also wants to add.
Sorry, it muted or?
Okay,
Sorry,
Dustin,
I got cut off.
Yeah, you should be back now.
So if we were to add, say, like 6 new translate values, is there one adjustment tables that all of those values could go onto, or like where you add rows, or
yeah, unfortunately it's a very convoluted table. I mean, adjustment table is a very, very difficult setup. I mean, there are some good features in there where there's copy features available, but in the midstream, if you're, let's say, adding 5 or 6 different reasons to an existing withdrawal or drop or whatnot, those need to be added manually. All those reasons need to be added manually to reflect the point in time, like 100% refund from 0 days to whatnot. So those changes, so those rows need to be inserted for each of those reasons. But that's only happening for one term. If it happens to be that you want to actually do it for the next term, also the same ones, then you essentially just copy the adjustment calendar from term to term. So that part is fine, but making sure all the reasons are added into the adjustment calendar is a one-time task. But yes, unfortunately, there isn't any cleaner, just one shot kind of thing where it adds all the reasons things. There are some scripts that people have written to, make the adjustment reason table in sync with what the refund calendar or adjustment calendar is from student records to student financials, but that's typically custom. I mean, I've seen people who have a lot of adjustment reasons or withdrawal reasons in student records, but not all those reasons are accounted for in the refund schedule or adjustment calendar, which creates issues because, if the student drops or draws with a specific reason, which is not in your adjustment calendar, then, the calculation is not going to, or the refund schedule is not going to be correct. Or refunds are not going to be correct. So that always happens. So that discrepancy needs to be accounted for. So you make sure that whatever reasons you create, you also account it for in your refund adjustment calendar.
Okay, and along those lines, the enrollment reasons that are separate from drop withdraw reasons, would it be good to have like the exact same reasons in the
it's not
enrollment
needed.
reasons?
It's not needed to have the same reasons. Essentially, it's going to do a union of the reason tables in order to create the total adjustment reasons, right? So, enrollment, typically institutions try to keep the reason codes the same. But in this case, if you're allowing the students to enroll or to drop with, doing a self-service, then choosing a reason or administratively choosing a withdrawal reason makes sense, which is a part of that drop-down, which is essentially a translate table. That is essentially a translate table. Enrollment reason is a code, which is a setup code, but that's it's kind of, when it does the adjustment calendar, it does a union of the enrollment reasons and the translate table values.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, one final question. Carol, I still can't unmute you, but you say Ayumi can answer the question about or discuss the topic of waiving a requirement for degree audit and what you're doing there at Dominguez Hills. Ayumi, your mic is unmuted. You should be able to talk now. Okay. Is anyone else out there waiving requirements? Can you raise your hand if you are, so we could at least answer that topic or talk about that? And see, I know that's come up on other calls. Any other questions?
I don't know if we want to take a moment. We didn't really touch on SAP in a specific way. I know there were a few financial aid folks who had SAP questions. I don't know if any of those people are still on the calls and want to talk through any of the scenarios they're seeing.
Okay.
Okay.
And I know Claire raised her hand. I just can't unmute her. Something's going on with this. It says you're self-muted.
I'm not muted now.
Claire, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I was very intrigued about the possibility of having a grade category specifically for this unique scenario that people are experiencing. And my question is, if you do choose to do that, do you add that to the existing grade basis that you're going to be using for this particular semester, or do you have to add a new effective dated row to the grade scheme?
Oh, I'm sorry, I was mute. So I can answer the part of the question, and maybe Ricky can answer the requirements part of the question. But if you really want to have the grade category not affect the existing requirements that for which the pre-spring requirements, and you would still need to use the grade category. The academic requirements need to still use the grade categories for those older terms. Yes, you're better off creating a new effective dated row and you use the grade scheme table or on the grade scheme table and use the new grade category with that new effective dated row, so that starting from spring, this new grade category is going to be used for in your new academic requirements, or maybe an updated academic requirements that is going to use an existing requirement line to subtract some of these courses with your new grade category. So to answer your question, yes, it makes sense to create a new effective data row so that you are clearly having a demarcation that starting from spring, you're using a new grade category associated with the grade base.
Thank you.
Okay, Ayumi, can you unmute yourself now? I think you sent us a note that you could. Oh, there you go.
Hi, so sorry. Too many video conferencing setups. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so I work with Carolyn, and essentially our school, we have an upper division writing requirement that all students have to complete to graduate. And it can be completed either by a test or by taking a specific class. And our students usually have to take it in their junior or their senior year. And so our campus right now, we're trying to figure out the best way to waive this requirement for our spring 2020 and possibly our summer 2020 graduates. And one of the options we were discussing was doing like Vicki was mentioning with the exceptions to waive each one. But we were also discussing the possibility of using a service indicator to just give all graduating students a milestone to complete that requirement. And I think as we're discussing the possibility of doing a waiver, an exceptions waiver, we have been in discussions with our graduation unit, who would probably be the ones to submit those waivers as they're clearing graduates. And I think some of the concerns is just like that, the workload and the extra time it might put onto the evaluators to clear graduations when we're also dealing with all these other changes.
Okay, so it's interesting that you mentioned milestones, because that was one of the things I was going to suggest, but in my opinion, there's a lot of maintenance with the milestones too, because you have to put it on a student, then you have to have some type of dynamic condition that sees the milestone. So you have to do some changes in your setup as well. I would probably more so go with the student exception, the waiver. And I know, like you said, there are concerns about, having to go in and put this on every student and the time it would take. But one thing that you can do with those student exceptions, did you know that you can use like a student group code and build the exception with that student group code? And then all you have to do to apply that waiver to your different students is to add that student group code to that student's record. And that will apply that waiver that you've built. And I think that's probably the easiest way, the quicker way to make that happen and waive requirements. And then student group codes have security, so you could give those people, because I know, there's a lot of overuse for student group codes, but you could give those people, security access just to the student group codes they're going to use. And all they have to do is slap that code on the student. There's even a batch process delivered that you can identify those students who are graduating or have been approved to graduate in those terms. You can have the batch process put a student group code on those students as well.
Oh, that's awesome. I wasn't aware of the student group code usage for the student exceptions. So thank you.
I think that's probably the cleanest way to go with it.
Thank you.
Great. I want to move on to an SAP question. Joanna, can you unmute yourself? It says you're self-muted.
I think it's open now.
You are open and we can hear you.
All right. So obviously, as Sarah said, we don't have official full guidance from the Department of Ed yet regarding the SAP question, but it does at some point kind of indicate that possibly we will be able to exclude grades from this term for students that are affected by COVID in order to, not nail them for maybe an incompletion or a partial completion or a bad grade because of the changeover from in-person to online. So I wasn't sure what kind of processes we already have in existence to exclude them. It looks like within PeopleSoft setup for SAP, you've got your main defined setup criteria page, and that does allow you to do some grades that obviously if you want to put in like the pass, no pass grades, you can put those in there and then they're excluded, but that's only one half of the equation. So I wasn't sure how we handle both sides at the same time.
And when you say both sides, what do you mean?
The qualitative and the quantitative.
Well, so I think that's again where you need to coordinate with your records office. I think that the easiest way to exclude these grades from the qualitative analysis is to be in alignment from a grade basis, grade setup perspective, and make sure that they don't have a grade point impact, which it sounds like based on what like Vicki and some of the AA folks were saying earlier, is generally going to be the case. And I think that's another reason again, my personal preference would probably be to have like a separate set of grades for students impacted. Because it would allow you to make, again, I think it's going to get really murky, but I do think the department is going to want you to restrict some of these exceptions to students impacted, although obviously, you know, everyone is impacted. It would at least allow you to make a distinction. So like, you know, we have, a lot of schools have that concept of like failing and failing not attended. It might be beneficial to have a concept of like failing and like failing COVID.
Okay.
And if as like Vicki was discussing on the grade point or on the grading setup, you said that that didn't have a grade point impact, it should just not have a grade point impact, which would basically exclude it from the qualitative calculation.
Okay. And that's where too, I think the quantitative side, the number of times you've taken the class, how many hours that counts towards the maximum number of hours we allow for your degree and all,
right.
That kind of looks like, yeah, that's still going to count, but that falls almost more under than the repeat rule.
Right, yeah. I mean, I think that the department needs to provide a lot more information on what they're planning to do.
Yes, and soon, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think the stat piece, the stat piece is important. I'm surprised they haven't provided more guidance on R2T4s yet because, I mean, students are withdrawing. I'm assuming schools are doing calculations to stay in compliance. And if the department comes back and says, hey, wait, that's going to be really messy. But yeah, I think that again, just that lack of clarity right now about what you're actually going to have to do is one of the real reasons that my personal preference would be to keep these students kind of as distinct as possible so that if the department's guidance does change, you can at least go back and identify them really easily.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure, thank you.
All right, excellent. And it looks like we are at the top of the hour. Gosh, thank you, Vicki, Sarah, Samir, so much for your time. And thank you, everybody, for joining. If anyone has any follow-up questions, please feel free to pass them along and we can help however we can. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, take care.